listening to the Born Primitive Podcast.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Born Primitive Podcast. Good afternoon, Claire.
Good afternoon, Tony. How you doing?
Good. For our regulars, you may have noticed two things. First off, I'm doing the intro, which is usually not the case. And then second off, you heard Claire's voice, who was actually on last week's episode. Bear had something pop up today that he needed to attend to. So Claire, who you'll see why she's a perfect fit for this episode, will be the co-host today. So welcome back, Claire.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Of course. And today's guest is Gary Sinise. And most of you, just by the name alone, don't need an intro. But Gary is an award-winning actor, humanitarian, advocate for veterans. His films include blockbusters like Apollo 13, The Green Mile, Ransom, and of course, Forrest Gump, where he played wounded Vietnam soldier Lieutenant Dan Taylor, a role for which he was nominated for an Academy Award. He starred in numerous hit TV shows, is the author of the book Grateful American, and the founder of Lieutenant Dan Band and the Gary Sinise Foundation, whose mission is to serve our nation by honoring our defenders, veterans, first responders, their families, and those in need, by creating and supporting unique programs designed to entertain, educate, inspire, strengthen, and build communities. Welcome to the podcast, Gary.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Of course. And I think what I want to kick off with today is just a cool little story that actually took place about 20 minutes ago as I was prepping for the podcast. So I was in here, like I said, doing some homework on both the Gary Sinise Foundation, and I had a friend pop in who I hadn't seen in a while, who is a military member here. He's a Navy SEAL based in Virginia Beach, and he asked me, hey, who are you doing today on the podcast? And I said, Gary Sinise. And he said, whoa, my graduating buds class of 289, Gary Sinise was a guest speaker at. And I was like, oh, no way. And why I wanted to tell this story is that what he said, I think, just sums up you and what you've already left, or what you the work you continue to do within the military and then veteran community. He said, in a world with so many people who want to scream from the rooftops when they do something good, Gary Sinise is somebody, from everything I've seen, that does the work and doesn't look for the recognition. So I just thought that was such a cool little thing as I was prepping for an individual that had no clue that I was even doing this with you, for him to just have a cool little side story about the influence you even had on him when he had just made it through BUDS training was really cool. So my first question, Gary, centers around that. Where did this calling come from? Where did this service towards military members and veterans, where did that stem from?
Well, it probably begins with my family. You know, a lot of veterans on my side of the family and my wife's side of the family. World War I, my grandfather, 2 World War II veterans, my 2 uncles. My dad was in the Navy in the 50s during the Korean War. On my wife's side of the family, her 2 brothers are Vietnam veterans. Her sister served in the Army. She married a Vietnam veteran. They had a son. He joined the Army, served in Afghanistan, and now he's a cop in Nashville. So there's a lot of service on both sides of the family here. So it all kind of starts there, I think. And then there's just various steps along the way over the decades that have kind of led to where things are now, which is a very vigorous and active program that supports across multiple spaces in our veteran community and our first responder community, our Gold Star families, and all of that. I would be curious about your buddy because I remember quite well. If I could just tell a story, this was probably 2012, maybe around in there, or 2011, 12, that class graduated, and I had seen the class finish Hell Week. So I remember that I was visiting down there, and they said, "Come on, Gary, we'll show you around. We'll do some stuff, and the class will be finishing up that day." So they took me out, the instructors and the leadership, and we were standing on this berm, kind of looking down at the ocean on Coronado, and the class was all out there. And this is the final moment of Hell Week, right? And they're all facing the ocean. So they're looking away. They don't know we're behind them up on this berm. And the guys who were down there with them said, okay, turn around and get your ass up there and run up to the berm. and they turn around and they run up there and they fall down in front of us. And they're all the leaders are there, and I'm there. Out of this actor completely out of place and no business being there. And of course, everybody who's just gone through Hell Week is like hallucinating. They've been hallucinating. They're hallucinating for days. They don't know what time it is, where they are, what's going on. And so they make them all stand up, and then we go down and visit them, one by one down the lines and everything. And I just imagined every one of them, they're shaking and snots all over their face and everything. They've been in the water for a week. And I just imagined that they thought they must have been dreaming or on some sort of drug thing, that Lieutenant Dan was standing there. Are they watching the movie now or what? And so it was a great day. I have great pictures from that day. And the following year, I went back to watch them graduate. And I went to the graduation and everything. And it was great. I remember all these things. I've been on so many bases over the years. But that was a special one because they let me come to see the class kind of finish up Hell Week that day. And that was special. They don't do that a lot, let people come in and see that.
Well, that is, I mean, what an incredible story. And when we cut today and when we go off air, I'm going to tell you a story about the individual, because I'm sure you probably, what's so wild, that's a time warp for me, because I've known him now for 6 years. And I'll tell you a little bit about his story. He's been in now for, 13 or 14 years, if you count kind of basic and stuff. So I'll tell you some offline stories. It's just really fascinating, though, that you were one of those there at the commencement of Hell Week and then his graduation as well, and to see what your presence, the effect it had on him. And this is an individual, for him to compliment, like, he's usually the opposite, calling people out for like kind of touting that they serve the military community, but it's kind of a smokescreen. So his kind words to you truly are a testament to the influence that you have within that community.
I appreciate that.
Of course. So were there any big, so as you said, it was kind of decades that started to stack on top of each other as far as your involvement and you giving back. But were there any big catalyst moments? Because, I mean, you're a well-known actor. You had Forrest Gump. You had all these big movies. But as you reflect back, were there any like singular moments where you look at like, whoa, that really sparked me to double down on this and really give back?
Yeah, there were a few. I document them. I wrote a book in 2019 called Grateful American, and these were important moments, so I document them extensively in the book. One was shortly after Forrest Gump opened. It was a big hit and got a lot of attention and everything like that. And I was playing a wounded veteran, Vietnam veteran, Lieutenant Dan, and I received a call from the Disabled American Veterans Organization shortly after the movie opened, and they invited me to come to their national convention. They wanted to present me with an award for playing Lieutenant Dan. And I didn't know what the DAV was. I did some research on the double amputation because I was playing a double amputee. So I did some research on that and spoke to some, wounded service members who had the same injury, but I didn't learn about the DAV. I didn't know anything about them. And so it's the Disabled American Veterans Organization. They had, at the time, they had 1.5 million wounded veterans as a part of their organization. Been around for years and years. It's over 100 years old now. And they invited me to come, and I remember they took me. It was at the Conrad Hilton in Chicago, and I was in a hotel room up above, and they brought me down through the kitchen to the ballroom, and I was standing in the back behind these doors, getting ready to go out in the ballroom. They said they held me there, and I could hear my voice on the video screen screaming at the hurricane. Remember, there's a scene with Lieutenant Dan, and he's up on the boat on the mast, and he's screaming at the hurricane, and he's saying, "Come on, give me everything you got. I can take it." and all that. It's a great scene. And that was being played in the ballroom. And then they introduced me to come out, and I came out on stage and I looked out there, and it was a ballroom filled with 2,500, 3,000 people, fully 2/3, maybe 2,000 wounded veterans in the audience. I mean, it was incredible, going all the way back to World War II. At that time, this was 1994, and they were applauding and cheering, and those who could stand up, were standing up, and other people were in wheelchairs banging on their seats and clapping. They were cheering me for playing this part in a movie, and I was really caught off guard by it. I knew what, by the time I got there, I had done some research and found out what the DAV was, but I was not prepared for the emotion that kind of raced across me, standing there looking at all these wounded veterans cheering for me. And that was a galvanizing moment at that point. And I stayed very, very actively involved with the DAV, have all this time, all 30 years now, have been very, very actively involved with the DAV. And I play their national convention every year with my band and all of that. So that's been an important relationship. And I would say 9/11 was the other big turning point for me. And another galvanizing moment toward taking action and serving in a much deeper and more active capacity. I think everything that had happened, the veterans in my own family, working with Vietnam veterans in the 80s in Chicago, starting to work with wounded veterans in the 90s because of Lieutenant Dan, and all of that has just teed up this motivation in me to try to do something to help the men and women who were deploying in reaction to what had happened on September 11, 2001. And people started raising their hands and volunteering and going out and joining the service. And we started having people getting hurt and getting killed. And I just couldn't sit back and do nothing. So it turned me toward a greater action that eventually just manifested itself into the creation of my own nonprofit organization, the Gary Sinise Foundation.
And what year was that when it was officially founded?
I started getting after September 11th, I started getting involved with multiple nonprofits. One of the first things I did, I'm an actor, so what do? You volunteer for the USO. And so I started visiting troops all over the place, going to the war zones. And my first trips to Iraq were in 2003. And, I just was going on trips all the time and volunteering. Then I got a TV series, CSI New York. So I would try to find ways that I could carve in trips to military bases on the weekends, and I would take my band, and I was doing all that kind of stuff. And at the same time, volunteering for a lot of other service organizations besides the USO. There was one called Hope for the Warriors. And there's the DAV, of course, there's too many. They're too numerous to mention. But I got involved with first responders. I went to New York City and started supporting organizations there, the Fire Family Transport Foundation, Friends of Firefighters, all these organizations that were supporting the first responders in New York. And of course, we all know how many were lost there that terrible day. I started supporting them in various ways. So multiple years of just supporting a lot of different organizations that sort of eventually just told me that the next big step for me would be to create my own support nonprofit. And that's when the Gary Sinise Foundation was created, and we launched it publicly in 2011. So we're 14 years in now.
And Gary, so post 9/11, it sounds like things really picked up for you, and your kind of calling became more and more obvious to you. But at the same time, having done some research on you, I mean, you were like I said, a well-known actor. As you said, you're offering your time. You're traveling to these war zones. You're going to Iraq, Germany, Italy. How did you balance all of those things while still raising a family? And is that something, as you reflect back on now, and honestly, I'm asking for personal reasons, because I think it's anything, as somebody who has passions and has these callings, which I do, and have now a third one on the way with two under 3 years old. It's something, as a father, you try to balance internally and know, like, where is that point? And I think for each individual, it probably lies somewhere different. So there's definitely no one size fits all, and there's no blanket answer to it. But from your experience and having gone through it, like, how were you balancing those things? And as you reflect on that, was that a challenge to you, or was it obvious that, like, no, these are the things that I need to do right now?
It was a challenge, and it was a sacrifice on the part of my family, because, again, as I said, on my wife's side of the family, there are Vietnam veterans, and and my wife was all too aware of what happened to our Vietnam veterans when they came home from war and they didn't get the support they deserved. And, they kind of fell into the shadows. Her brother, she had two brothers, and her sister's husband, combat medic. They all served in Vietnam. I learned a great deal from them back in the 70s and 80s about what it was like to go off and serve and then come home to a divided nation, a nation that was spitting on them when they came home. It was a terrible time to be a veteran, and many of our Vietnam veterans just disappeared into the shadows. So my wife was well aware of what happened to them, and now we have a new generation raising their hand, going off to fight in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it became a bit controversial. If you remember, I mean, the country was kind of galvanized after the attack, and folks were, wanted something to be done. We were all looking for, what are the ways that we can kind of exercise this pain that we have inside of us. A lot of people raised their hand and went to war. Well, I wasn't going to go to war, but I had a broken heart, and I felt a lot of pain for what had happened to our country and to what had happened to the families of people that were killed that day. And I had a lot of empathy for those that were going to war now, and those families that were starting to lose loved ones, and people who were starting to get banged up and end up in the hospitals. I started visiting the hospitals early on, way back when we first started deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan, and seeing a lot of wounded folks. And so my wife was all too keen on me doing whatever I could to support. So the family was behind me. And if they were not, if it was like, oh, do you have to go on another trip, and can't you just stay home, and don't you feel like you've done it already? You've been on all these trips. Well, it was something that was becoming a very regular part of my life, just to do everything I could throughout that period of time to make sure that our defenders in Afghanistan and Iraq would not start feeling like our Vietnam veterans did when they went off to war, and the nation was divided. And I could see that kind of thing happening. If you recall, there was a lot of, the media and did not like George Bush. They were just on his case all the time about the war and all this stuff. People were getting hurt. And I didn't want the men and women who were deploying to fall into these cracks. I didn't want them what happened to our Vietnam veterans to happen to them, to where they would get caught in this division over whether or not we should be there or not. I just wanted to support them. If they were going to be there, then I wanted to go be there as much as I could with them, and I wanted to support other organizations that were doing the same thing that I wanted to do, which is make sure that they know they're appreciated and that there are services available to them when they come home, and and throughout their deployments. So I started sending school supplies. I mean, you can look up the history. There was a program we started in 2004 called Operation Iraqi Children. It started off with Iraq, where we started shipping thousands of school supply kits to the troops. And they would load up their trucks and go on a convoy and go on some mission. And they would have all these school supplies in the trucks. And maybe they were pulling into a hostile village, that some place that was maybe going to be dangerous, but they would pull over and open the truck up, pull the boxes out, and start handing the supplies out. And all of a sudden, the temperature just came down in the village, and more and more people started to come out to grab those supplies. And Operation Iraqi Children became a very big hearts and minds campaign. And we started shipping to Afghanistan and Djibouti and Haiti, places where our troops were deploying. Remember the big earthquake in Haiti? Just awful. We sent a lot of troops down there, and we shipped school supplies to them so they could take them and give them to the kids. These programs were very, very beneficial, and a part of what led to the creation of the Gary Sinise Foundation. Just entertainment, support for children, support for the children of our fallen heroes through an organization I got involved with years ago called Snowball Express, that is now a big program at the Gary Sinise Foundation, where we take care of the children of our fallen, not only our fallen military heroes, but our fallen first responders. So all this so much was going on back then. And, again, I do the audio book of Grateful American. You can always grab it and listen. And I tell the story of how I got so involved in all of this stuff. And the more I did it, the more I wanted to do. And the more my family saw me doing it, they made the sacrifices. Do I wish there were moments with my children that I had back and that I don't have because I was gone on some trip or I was shooting some show or something? Yeah, of course. But all my kids they're wonderful, and they see the fruits of all that labor in the Gary Sinise Foundation and the millions and millions of dollars that we've raised and deployed all over the place to help people, and they're proud of it.
What a great answer. And I think where you land on, and where because I've asked the question to way wiser people than myself, including yourself, which you just gave a great answer to, is that yes, in the short term, you can convince yourself. I think that being there all the time is the best. And at times that may be true, but then for them to see an example, and you're a great example of it, where your passion and your calling seeps out of you and in your words, and even just prepping for this interview, it's so obvious the passion you have for what you're doing. The long-term effects on your children will probably outweigh even a couple additional days spending with them. And of course, there's a balance there, I know, but I just think you're a great example of setting an example that your kids can look at. And I'm sure maybe in the short term be frustrated by, but then once they're 20 or 30, they reflect back at holy shit, look what dad did, which is truly playing the long game.
Thank you for saying that. I remember sitting down with my son at one point, and he was considering coming to work for the Gary Sinise Foundation. So I took him into the foundation one day when he was younger. He was in his 20s. He was a drummer, just an exceptional musician. And he was making his way in that way and went to music school and all that. And I took him in, and I wanted to show him the foundation and just have a private day with him. I brought him in on a Saturday, and I said, let's sit down and open up the website. And there's a volunteer service history page that documents all the trips going back 20 some years, more than 20 years. And you can travel all the way back and scroll through this. And I was doing that with him, and I was scrolling through the years where he was, pretty young. Back in, he's maybe 12, 13. And I was scrolling through those years, and it was just one trip after another. Boom, 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 gone, gone, gone. shooting TV, gone on the weekend, shooting TV, gone on the weekend, boom, boom, boom. And I stopped for a second and I turned to him. I said, holy cow, I was gone. I was gone through this whole period when you were a kid and you were growing up. And he got a kind of a little smirk on his face and he nodded and said, yeah, Dad. Um, but then he said, but when you were home, you were home. You were really home. So that made me feel better, because I knew that he wasn't resentful, that I had, gone off and done this work because, and then later on, years later, he came and actually was working for the foundation. And he really understood at that point how much the foundation had done and was doing. And he was seeing the people that we were helping. And he was meeting all these incredible people that I know, Medal of Honor recipients and, on and on and on. And he had just a tremendous pride for it all. And I think our daughters, I know our daughters feel the same way. And my wife does. We're very proud, but the family had to sacrifice some, if they wouldn't have been on board with it, like I said, if they wouldn't have been on board and supportive, then I wouldn't have done it. And there would be no Gary Sinise Foundation. And there might, probably wouldn't be a Lieutenant Dan band and all these things that I do. But they were okay because they knew I wasn't just going on golf trips and fishing trips with the buddies and stuff like that. I was going and sleeping on floors and, eating crappy food and, and waiting for the shower and all that. When you go to some of these military bases and all that in the war zones, I mean, you got to be ready to, to struggle through it a little bit because it's not great accommodations all the time and everything. And you're trying to hit as many places as you can in a short period of time to see as many people as you can in a short period of time. So I would shake thousands of hands and take thousands of pictures and then started taking the musicians with me, and we played hundreds of concerts now. So the family really is, I think they're pretty proud. And when they go to the office, they can feel their own, they can feel their own input into what has happened and, their own contribution into what has happened with the Gary Sinise Foundation.
Well, and Gary, and I know that son you're talking about, that I could tell just drummed up some emotion for you. I know he passed. My heart as a father, my heart absolutely goes out to you. But it does seem like it's something you're comfortable talking about, his legacy and how he influenced. And I know he worked at the Gary Sinise Foundation for a while. So talk to me a little bit about what is his legacy and how did he influence in his time at the foundation, the work that you guys are doing?
Yeah, his name's McKenna Anthony Sinise. Everybody called him Mac, and he's named after my wife's brother, one of those Vietnam veteran brothers that I spoke of. Her oldest brother was a two-tour Vietnam veteran, West Point graduate, highly decorated guy. He died, unfortunately, of cancer himself in 1983. As a lieutenant colonel, but I have no doubt. There's no doubt in my mind that Mac would have been a 4-star general. I mean, that's no doubt. I've met 4-star generals that he taught at West Point. Two very good friends of mine, General Mike Scaparrotti and General Vince Brooks. When I met them initially, I said, you went to West Point. What year? And they told me the year. And I said, did you know Mac Harris? And both of them, when I had told them, each of them that, their faces just lit up. And they just started rambling on about how great Mac was and how much they learned from him and everything. So Mac was on his way. Unfortunately, we lost him. But our son, I remember calling my wife up when she was pregnant with him and saying, I know the name that we should call our son, and we should name him after your brother. And so we named him McCanna, and everybody called him Mac. He started drumming when he was 9 years old. I bought him a drum set, and he started banging on the drums, and he could play like almost immediately. He could put it together, and that's not every kid can do that. Coordinate the hands doing different things and the feet doing different things, but he could do it, and he picked it up quickly and studied all through high school. Had high school bands. Went to USC music school. He was a superb drummer when he got to music school, but when he got there, he wanted to branch out and just do all kinds of things in music. So he started songwriting and composing and learning piano and guitar and conducting. He wanted to write for film, and he started doing all of that, in college, and he learned quite a bit. And then, after college, he went on the road with various bands, drumming overseas, and he went to the Philippines and Europe and Asia and all around this country, drumming and everything. I kept trying to get him to come and work for the foundation because he was getting a little tired of being on the road. And he was also, his tailbone was really starting to hurt him. He thought he had a bicycle accident where he kind of bruised or fractured his tailbone or something. So he started carrying this cushion around, like he'd go to the movies and sit on a cushion, or go to a restaurant and sit on a cushion, because it was getting hard for him to sit. And therefore, it was getting hard for him to play drums. Little difficult. So I said, why don't you put your toe in the water and come and work for the Gary Sinise Foundation a little bit? And he had been reluctant, to come and work for Dad and everything like that. But there was a point where he wanted something new and wanted something different and he wasn't being fulfilled the way he wanted. And so he came to start work at the Gary Sinise Foundation in 2017, February of 2017, and he just fell in love with it. He loved it and wanted to do everything he could for the foundation. And part of what he would do was, he'd give tours of the foundation, and he'd tell my story there, which the story of the foundation is how it ended up getting there, was all this stuff that I talked about that came before the foundation. So he learned all that history, and he would give tours. And in fact, after he died, I got this wonderful, amazing note from David Bellavia, who is a Medal of Honor recipient from an action in Iraq. And David's a friend of mine. And he had come to the foundation at one point for a visit, and I wasn't there. I was out of town. So I said, Mac, take care of David and show him around, give him a great trip. So after Mac died, I got this amazing note from David about what that day meant to him and how much he loved Mac that day. That meant so much to me. And Mac was meeting a lot of people. He was engaging with them. He was happy. But that tailbone started to become a problem, so much so that he was having trouble sleeping. And we eventually sent him to, my wife had some spine surgeries, and we sent Mac to her spine surgeon, and he called me up and said, Mac has a tumor on his tailbone. And I jumped in the car and went down to his office where Mac was, and they showed me the scan, and it was that big, wrapped around his sacrum. And it's a tumor. It's called chordoma. And if you look it up, you'll see that it's a very, very rare tumor, maybe 300. It's a 1 in a million kind of cancer. So maybe 300 something, just 330 people in the US are diagnosed every year with this. That's not a lot. About 70% of the time they can remove the tumor and it's cleared, it's gone. But 30% of the time it will come back and recur and spread. And unfortunately, we found out in May of 2019 that it had come back, and that began a very serious oncology and radiation fight and more surgeries to remove tumors as they were growing and spreading. And it disabled him, and he couldn't work for the foundation anymore. But right before one of his surgeries in 2020, he was thinking, well, if I can't go to the office anymore, maybe I can do a podcast from home. So he started doing a podcast. And if you go to our website, you'll see right there on the homepage, you'll see the podcast and you can click on it. And the original audio podcast that Mac did are right there to listen to. One of them was with me and one of them was with our videographer who's followed me around for years. And after Mac died, I just decided, you know what, we're going to resurrect that podcast and we're going to do it in Mac's honor. So we now have a full-on podcast that Kristen Barter is the host, and she was Mac's supervisor when he was working at the foundation. Mac was working under her in her department, doing all kinds of great things. And, you know, were it not for the cancer cutting things down, Mac would be one of our young leaders there now, I have no doubt. Service was in his heart, and he loved seeing the foundation help a lot of people. Do you want me to go on? Because I've got another part of the story,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely. Please. It's a beautiful story.
Mac, as I said, was a musician. And when he came to work for the foundation, one of the things I asked him to do was to write some music for our videos. If you look at our website, you'll see, you go to the YouTube channel, you'll see a gazillion videos, right? And the video guys, they grab music off the internet or wherever they can find it and they stick it in, you know, into the videos and whatnot. And they were making a documentary that kind of tracks my history of how I got involved in this. Some of the stuff that I told you about, you know, getting involved with Vietnam veterans and, you know, Forrest Gump and all that kind of stuff. And so they were making a full-on 55-minute documentary tracking that history. And I suggested, Mac, why don't you write music for the documentary? So he wrote about 75% of the music that's used in the documentary while he was working at the Gary Sinise Foundation. And he would do it on his computer with all his programs, and, you know, he had all the samples of the cellos and the drums and the bass, and, you know, he could create all the music right there on his computer and just write it all. So he wrote all this beautiful music that's used in the documentary. And, you know, after he got so sick that he became very disabled, he was disabled from the chest down. He could still move his arms, but he had no feeling from here down. Couldn't walk, was confined to a hospital bed, or we'd have to put him in something called a Hoyer lift, where you put this kind of is sort of, I don't know what, I can't think of what it's called, but you put it underneath him and then you strap the sides to the Hoyer lift and you crank it up and it can lift him out of the bed and then put him into the wheelchair. And so we would put him in the wheelchair here and there, take him places, that kind of thing. So he wasn't playing music, obviously, wasn't playing drums, kind of wasn't thinking about music for a little while because he was fighting cancer. He was trying everything he could think of. And I was sort of the air traffic controller through the whole thing, trying to deal with the doctors, trying to deal with the drugs, figure out the hospital appointments. Where's he going to radiation? Check him into the hospital. How's he, you know, all the different things. He tried 25 different drugs over a 4-year period and nothing worked. But last year, 2023, he said to me, it was probably February of last year. He said, "Dad, there's this piece of music that I wrote in college that I'd kind of like to finish. I never finished it." And he didn't play it for me or anything. He said to me, he was very close with my band members because he played with us when my drummer couldn't do it. Mac would be sit in. And he said, "Do you think that Dan, who is our violin player, would work with me on it?" And they had a good relationship. And I said, "Call Dan, ask him." So Dan said, "Of course." So Max started sending him, the piano score for the song and everything. And Dan started to make some notes back and forth. Then my piano player got involved and started helping Max sort of flesh it out some more. Then an old buddy of Max, Oliver Schnee from USC Music School, happened to contact him after many years of not seeing each other. He came over and said, and they started talking, and Mac played him this piece of music that he's working on and asked Oliver if he would help him finish it. So that was probably about June of last year. And by July last year, they were in the studio recording this beautiful, it's magnificent. It's called Arctic Circles. And if you go to Mac Sinise YouTube, you will see the videos of Arctic Circles, Mac playing harmonica on Shenandoah, two other original pieces that Mac wrote called Penguin Dance and Cloud Surfing. And these were all recorded last year for what Mac wanted to do was create an entire album of music. Once they had that Arctic Circles session last July, he said, "Let's do a whole record." So they ended up recording 10 songs, and Mac created an album called Resurrection and Revival that we basically finished it the week he went into the hospital. The videos for that particular record, some of those sessions were done in Nashville after the session in July in Los Angeles. And so those videos were created, and he saw them in December. And then shortly, like the day after he saw them, he had to go in the hospital for the last time. So he never saw the actual vinyl record that he wanted to make. He designed the front and back, and he said he wanted to print 100 albums. And if we ever sold any, the proceeds could go to the Gary Sinise Foundation. After he died, I said, let's increase it to 500 records. And then we posted a story on the Gary Sinise Foundation website in February of this year, February of this year, telling the story about Mac and what had happened to him and Cordoma and fighting with everything he had till the last minute and creating all this beautiful music. And we put the album up for pre-sale, and it's now sold 3,600 vinyl copies on the Gary Sinise Foundation website. And the final beat to that is after he died, I started looking through his iPhone, his iPad, his Dropbox files, all these things. And I started finding messages. I started finding videos that he made, talking to the camera and just talking about how he was feeling, about what he was going through. And I also found music that he wrote and tucked away that he never talked about. And I started to find more of it, and then more of it. Some I had heard, but a lot of it I hadn't heard, going all the way back to his college days. So I called his buddy Oliver up, who had worked with him on the first record, and I said, I think I want to do another project, Resurrection and Revival Part 2. So we finished all the recording for that. It's a double vinyl album with 2 discs, and it'll officially be available on the Gary Sinise Foundation website on November 10th. which is Mac's 34th birthday.
Wow.
I mean, what a way to go out as a hero too. I mean, for him to be making music, which is something I can just tell from you telling his story that was near and dear and a love of his. For him to be doing that literally until the day he died is just an absolute inspiration. And then just I mean, I feel speechless just to hear you tell that story, because it's so inspiring, and just a cool representation of a way to battle, and like you said, battle until the very end. So I really appreciate you telling that story.
Thank you. And I know you'll be knocked out by this music when you go to his YouTube channel. Start with Arctic Circles and just put some great headphones on and kick back and watch the video. It's been seen over 150,000 times.
I wrote it down, and
Yeah,
that
I
will be
did
the
too.
first.
I know we're going to
and-
hop out of here and I'm
yeah.
going to be putting that on while I get back to work. Gary, something I want to talk to you about, just because in this conversation it's evident, but of course we've watched, a lot of the videos on your website. There is so much emotion and authenticity in what you put out. And obviously just even in these stories about your son and about how you got inspired to start the Gary Sinise Foundation, I would love to just talk to you a little bit more about how you bring these veteran stories to life and how you do it in such a beautiful way that showcases our human nature that we all share in a time when there's so much media out there that's so dry, it's so surface level, and it just really misses the mark of what we as humans relate to, which is true, authentic emotion. It's raw. Sometimes it's not beautiful. Sometimes it's really painful. Would love to just hear you dive into that a little bit more, because you do it so superbly.
I feel blessed in so many ways. Even through all this tragic loss of our son and the difficulty of that, the way we got through that, watching his body just, I mean, it just got harder and harder. He went blind in one eye. He couldn't move his fingers on his right hand. He couldn't walk. I mean, all these things just compounded over time, and we had to keep kind of plowing through all that and looking to the next silver lining, around it all. And through it all, we kept our eye on the fact that we have been blessed with a lot of good fortune over time, and Mac was being well taken care of. I stopped working in 2019 as an actor. Then my last job was December 2019, and January of 2020, he went into the hospital for a cervical tumor removal on his neck, and he was in the hospital for 2 months, and then he was out for 2, and then he was back in for 4 with another spine surgery to remove more. So it became clear to me that I just needed to be as available as possible. I continue to try to do as much as possible with the service mission, because service is I've said this a gazillion times, it's a great healer for a broken heart. And it was after September 11th when I volunteered to start doing things and going out and visiting people and trying to lift people up through those difficult times. And it was through all this pain that we were struggling through as a family at home, with watching this disabling, crippling cancer take hold of our son. But Mac, my wife, myself, our daughters, we never forgot that there were a lot of things to be very thankful for, even though we had been dealt this card, and millions of people get dealt some pretty bad stuff in life. And you have a couple of choices. You face it and persevere through it, or you let it defeat you. I couldn't let it defeat me, because I was fighting for my battle buddy over here who was in the trench getting shot at, and I had to try to do everything I could to keep him alive. So I had to stay strong and persevere and not let those things get to me. And the way I was able to do that is by trying to always keep my eye on the good things that our family was experiencing, even through this difficult stuff. Service is a great healer, and it helped me through my own problems here in our family, to continue to do the mission and try to go out there and play some concerts for the troops, or help our families of our fallen, whatever we're doing. And now I have a great, fantastic team of people, great leaders at the Gary Sinise Foundation, over 70 employees here in Nashville, and a lot of them around the country, because our team travels a lot. They go here and there, and we're doing events every single day. We just gave another house away to one of our wounded just yesterday in California. So we built 93 of these specially adapted smart technology homes for badly wounded folks. I started doing that in 2010, before I had the foundation. It gave me, just to see that family, this broken family, walk into a brand new house that they don't have to pay for, and is particularly and specifically designed for them. All the needs, of somebody who might be wheelchair bound or have, severe disability because of their service. This house is just for them. And I've seen them, and that seeing them go in there and live in there and have it make life better for them just lifts me up and makes me feel good. So I feel like in some ways I'm somewhat of a conduit between the thousands and thousands and thousands of generous donors who go to the Gary Sinise Foundation website and donate so that we can do this work, and the people that we're trying to help. I'm the kind of middleman who kind of steers the generosity in certain directions, and I have a great team out there just getting the great work done on a daily basis. We have something happening every single day, 365 days a year, somewhere in the country or overseas. It's a great feeling. So
yeah, it's such an encouragement for, I just think, people who are out there right now who see kind of the state of our country and just the animosity that's brewing and has been brewing for a lot of time, that there's so much encouragement, there's so much hope. There are still people who are out there who want to help their neighbor, who want to sacrifice something out of their own life to help somebody that they don't even know. And I think for how your foundation brings that to light as kind of a beacon of hope that human nature is still good and there are still great things out there, it's just very inspiring. I watched a lot of your videos before we hopped onto this today, and have even in the past as well, and just felt incredibly moved by how much generosity is still out there in the world.
There is. Thank you. I mean, we have a great team doing the good work. I mean, it's their full-time job to do it. I'm a volunteer still, but we have so many, as I said, thousands and thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of donors that donate $5 or $50 or $500 or $5,000 and up, and so that we can continue to pass on their appreciation and gratitude for the people that we're serving. I mean, where would we be if we didn't have people that wanted to raise their hand and go defend our country, or, put a fire out, or pull somebody out of a burning car, or, chase the bad guys? I mean, we'd be in trouble, wouldn't we? So I know where my freedom comes from. It has to be fought for and protected, and I'm grateful for the men and women who do that kind of work. And I want to help them through. And I know what they feel like when they don't feel appreciated. And, our first responders went through, police officers, particularly in 2020, just, went through, I couldn't believe what was happening, with all that stuff. And while, there were people out there trying to defund the police, I was telling my staff, hey, we fund the police. So we know that there are police officers out there that are making great sacrifices. We have built homes for officers that were shot and are totally 100% disabled now because they were, they pulled the wrong guy over, and one guy, he's walking back to his car. The guy jumps out of his car and shoots the guy in the neck right here, and he's paralyzed from the neck down. There are police officers out there. He was just trying to do his job one day, and boom, there he go. And life is completely different for them now. So I feel for those folks, and I want to help them through. And I want to have an organization that people can trust and think is reliable, a reliable means to support our defenders and their families. And that's what the Gary Sinise Foundation is all about.
And right there is why we were so excited to have you on. Is we went through the same thing as a brand, just looking at some of the things that were happening in culture. In 2020 is a great example, and just kind of scratching our head and saying, like, wait a second, no, like we're taking a stance on this, and we will continue to stand in firm of the values that this company was founded on. So, Claire, before we give our, I have just a closing thought I'd love to deliver to Gary, but before that, I do think, this is releasing on Veterans Day. I'd love for you as the one running point on our internal campaign, and I think it relates perfectly to the work Gary does as well. Just give our listeners a little bit of what we decided to do this year, because it is unique, and I think it's worth just a couple minutes of you describing for the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So typically on Veterans Day weekend, we will have some kind of give back promotion going on throughout the weekend. This year, we're making our biggest impact on the veteran community to date. So we've already paid off $2.5 million of veteran medical bill debt. Obviously, that is something that can destroy a family and keep them from being able to move on with their life after they've already given so much in defense of our country. So our goal for this weekend, and we're getting down to the final hours now with it being this airing on Veterans Day, is to get to 5 million. So all profits from our online stores this weekend are going to be donated to that cause to hopefully relieve the $5 million in veteran medical debt. So we've got an incredible community of customers who really come out and show up for our veterans when we do these types of promotions, and our first responders when we do promotions for that community as well. And, similarly, with your organization, Gary, we really wanted this to be an impact on people, on the individual. We donate to a lot of amazing veteran organizations, and this effort this year is really going directly to help people. And we're getting responses in from some of the people who've received their letter that, hey, this $35,000 medical bill that's been weighing you down, that's destroyed your credit, it's gone, it's wiped out. And yeah, it really has been, I think, just a really cool process to see our whole team rally behind the effort, see our customers come out to shop to support the cause. And yeah, we're hoping we're going to hit that $5 million goal.
Bravo. Well, I want to tell you, I tried to help.
Hey, there we go.
I love it. Look at that.
So when
Do they fit well?
I looked you guys up when I heard I was coming on your show, and these are great. I love them.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, and Gary, just know, like, following this conversation, I would love to keep an open dialogue with yourself and your team. And I know you said you kind of have taken a step back, so I'm sure there's team members we can connect with. There's just so much alignment between what you guys are doing and what we stand for as a brand, and what we give back, as Claire said, as a brand. Like, that's not just a talking point for us. That's something we want to be, like, blatantly true at the grassroots, and we want to be actually affecting change in a tangible, objective way. So I would love to get in touch with your team and connect both Bear and Mal, the founders of Born Primitive, because I just think there's so much alignment and so much we could bring to life together.
Fantastic. You know how to find us, and we'd be honored to team up on all the great things that we need to do to take care of our defenders.
Perfect. Well, my closing thoughts is just a quote that I love to live by, and I think, Gary, your quote actually is very, and I don't know if it was yours, but the one you referenced several times throughout the podcast, of service is healing. A quote that I always love is, I think Don Howard actually said this, is, to be of service, you have to be fit for service. And I bring that up because I think you're a perfect representation of somebody who has maintained their self so that they could be of absolute service to a greater good. And I just want to say thank you for that. I think hearing your story, and you did a great job of kind of giving us a rundown of both when you were an actor, and then how you kind of transitioned to the work with the foundation, and then we're doing all those while raising a family, and then of course losing your son. Like, the human experience is such a fascinating one. And I think you said a word earlier of, like, we had to endure, and, like, to hear your story and the ups and downs. I mean, you went from fame, money, like one of the most well-known movies ever, to then just being of service for something greater than yourself. it truly is inspirational. And I think that's going to come through to the listeners. And I think it's just a great representation of the human spirit. Like, I don't think we're on this earth just to experience rainbows and butterflies, but while you're going through those hells or those trenches, it's hard to keep a healthy perspective, but you have endured through all of that. And I think that is a true wise man. And I just want to give you credit for that, because it's inspiring to hear.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you. And God bless you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you so much, Gary. And thank you to the listeners.
Thanks.
Have a good one.